And that was day 10. So here we go. We started talking about things like the blue zones and the paleo diet and the keto diet and low carb diet, their common denominators, but also the scientific evidence, so to speak, that would inform them. And some interesting ideas came up, some points for discussion, right? Everyone should, first of all, do and eat what they want to do, but to make certain claims about the effectiveness or efficacy of different diets, that would require maybe a slightly bigger burden of proof. And for example, some of the comments about the blue zone diet that you could highlight is, well, we only asked everyone over 100 what they did and deducted like 9 principles for eating from that. But what if we would ask everyone who was 50 to do the same thing and then deduct principles of that? Did we then see the difference between the people at 50 and at 100? No. And maybe more of those kinds of questions that can be asked about the methodology which was used to determine the efficacy of such a diet or a paleo diet or anything else. So, not that it can't work, but just to think about how the advice came to be formulated. That was interesting and it gave me a new lens to look at my relationship with food. So, the main principle, of course, stays in place. It's about managing your energy balance. And how do you then do that? Then we had a slight discussion about fat and carbohydrates and why we actually prefer to burn carbohydrates rather than fat, even though we're very efficient fat burning machines. That is something to do with the fact that you need the amount of energy that one molecule of oxygen can get out of a fat cell versus what it can get out of a carbohydrate cell. And it's just easier to get more energy out of carbohydrates, apparently. And then we also talked about relationships with food. So, for example, if we fall into the idea that there are good foods and bad foods, not for everyone, but for some people, this really distorts their relationship with food, which isn't necessarily going to help them in the long run, right? The whole goal of the thing, the entire idea of living healthy and well, is for us to develop sustainable long-term habits. And in that worldview, thinking in terms of good food and bad food doesn't help because we're surrounded by food. There's a lot of food in the environment. So then, the other one is, well, let's talk about being flexible. Everything's allowed, but you mind your caloric intake, something that I've been doing for the last 2 weeks. And apparently, also not necessarily right or wrong, but for some people, this highlights their um, poor relation with their body image. And is that then the path that you want to have people on, or is there a different approach that we want to take to this? Or, food is very functional. I'm going to eat what I want when I want, as long as it helps me achieve my goals of living healthy, active, etc. And there were some examples given about how hard it is actually when you are very active. So if you are an amateur sporter and you're training and you go into a competition season and you do a lot of high intense workouts, that it is very hard to actually suffer from a poor diet when you are exercising or exerting yourself at those very high levels. This is an interesting frame of reference to think about how do we approach the conversation about food. And we also talked again about motivation. Motivation is very useful, but it can also be very directional. If the motivation is strong, but the direction is negative, so for example, you are very motivated to eat more of a very high, very calorie dense food that doesn't satiate you because it doesn't have a lot of proteins in it, for example. But you have a very strong motivation to do that. The direction of the motivation is actually counterproductive to your goals of being healthy because that's a very easy way to start gaining weight. And there are certain points in weight gain which are very individual where a lot of excess weight might become problematic for your health. So this was another thing that we were thinking about. And I guess there are lessons to be drawn across population from the science, but then there's also the person and me individually. So there might be very broad stroke lessons that can be drawn from the science behind different research studies about performance, about weight loss, about weight management, about whatever. But then there's also me and the environment I live in, and the behaviors and the psychology that I have, and how do we use the science to inform the conversation with the individual. Um, of course, that's all about understanding their motivation, understanding their wish, the result, and also understanding the environment they are part of and whether their base psychological needs are met, and how we can start to instill small habits that can cascade and grow into bigger ones over time. Um, was a lot of talk about protein intake, right? And I guess for someone like me, the ideal would be 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. For someone who's not as active, it could be 1 gram, and if you were vegetarian or vegan, you would want to have 2 grams, maybe, specifically if you're trying to grow, and how the amino acid profile can be completed by complementing different kind of vegan or plant-based proteins, which is something I had not considered, but was interesting to learn about. So yeah, those were some of the insights for today. And now what's going to happen Monday is we're going to look specifically at how we can create a program, a lifestyle program, about both movement and health coaching, based on what we learned on a specific case that we're going to that we're going to work through on Monday. Looking forward to that. That will be day 11 and also the end of this course.